you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. We're going to start in 3 minutes, okay? We're going to start in just 3 minutes. And we're going to be talking about advancing decent work, green jobs, and sustainability in the forest sector, okay? So just 3 minutes, then we'll start. Thank you very much. If you want to come closer, feel free. You don't have to sit back there. I want to see your face. Thank you. So good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Henry Bonsu. I'm a television and radio broadcaster from the UK and Ghana. I'm delighted to be here back in Korea. It's my third time, and each time I come here, it's usually for something climate change related. And that's a tribute to the government of the Republic of Korea. It's clearly very concerned and very keen to play its part in this international debate. So today we're talking about advancing decent work, green jobs, and sustainability in the forest sector. And yesterday, in a session on nature-based solutions, I was talking to a coordinator of an umbrella group for Indigenous peoples, and he was talking about trees and nature-based solutions. His name was Juan Carlos, and he was saying, for us, the forests are so much more than economics. They're about a connection, a deep connection that we've had for thousands of years. We're the custodians, and we need to be respected, not marginalized, and we have a spiritual connection with the trees. And I thought, that's right, understood. But we're going to pivot from that, because spiritual connection with the trees is one thing, but that alone won't save them. What will save them is people feeling they have an enlightened self-interest, that the forests will help them, not just with the broad, general sense of saving the planet, but with their day-to-day livelihoods for themselves, their families, and their communities. So that's why decent work, green jobs, and sustainability is so important in this sector. So this session is organized by a number of groups, FAO, of course, the ILO, and UNEC, that's the Economic Commission for Europe, in collaboration with the Korea Forestry Service. And according to a recent study by FAO, the ILO, and the Thune Institute, the forest sector provides a lot of employment. I mean, we're talking about an estimated 33 million people. That's 1% of all employment across all sectors, which is huge. Forests, what do they provide? Well, of course, that spiritual connection, livelihoods, food, shelter, ecosystem services, many other benefits for the indigenous peoples who live in the forest, but everybody else, even if they don't always recognize it. So we're talking about decent work being fundamental to ensuring sustainable and productive forestry operations. Efficient, environmentally friendly, and safe for people working in them. We shouldn't forget them because we don't see them. So this session is going to highlight approaches, opportunities, and challenges to all stakeholders, including employers and workers' organizations, in promoting green jobs and decent work as a cornerstone for a viable contribution of the forest sector to growth and sustainability. So, objectives for this session. This is what we want to achieve in the next 80 or so minutes. We want to identify good practices, we've got speakers who can do that promote decent and sustainable work in the forest sector. What are decent jobs? What is good work? What is sustainable about this employment in the forestry sector? And then also we want to identify action, key action, realistic action required to achieve SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth. So we're going to organize a session in 4 segments. An opening one, we'll hear from the ILO, UNECE, and KFS, the Korea Forestry Service. That's the first one. Then we're going to have a dialogue between representatives of the employers and employees organizations nominated by ILO constituents. Then we'll move on to specifically discuss the role of women and youth as engines of the forest sector to promote decent work. We'll explain that. And then the final panel will discuss how evidence-based decision-making can be supported through the collection and analysis of sound employment statistics in the forest sector. Data, data, data. And then FAO will offer concluding remarks. So let's start with some opening submissions from the ILO and the UNECE. I welcome Ms. Alette Van Leur, who is an ILO director for the Sectoral Policies Department, and she will provide us with her opening remarks, and she'll be joining us remotely by way of video. Please run the VT.
Distinguished participants to the World Forestry Congress. Dear colleagues, dear panelists and speakers for this session. It is my great pleasure to open this session on advancing decent work, green jobs and sustainability in the forest sector in the 15th World Forestry Congress in Seoul. As a United Nations specialized agency responsible for the world of work, the International Labour Organization is proud to host this session with our sister organizations FAO and UNECE, and of course in collaboration with the Korea Forest Service. Partnerships and collaborations such as these are essential for promoting policy coherence towards a more sustainable future for the forestry sector. Decent and productive work is key for ensuring that the forest sector is environmentally, socially and economically sustainable, and that it guarantees adequate livelihoods for those millions of women and men, many of them indigenous and tribal peoples, depending on forests. It was exactly 3 years ago when the ILO organized a tripartite sectoral meeting on promoting safety and health in forestry. The meeting brought together representatives of governments, employers and workers from all around the world to not only try and find common ways forward to improve safety and health in forestry, but also to promote decent work in the sector more generally. Among its conclusions, this tripartite meeting highlighted the importance of social dialogue. Social dialogue based on respect for freedom of association and the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining. And this is key in the promotion of decent and sustainable work, including safe and healthy working conditions in forestry. Hence, we are delighted to have representatives of social partners, employers and workers joining the panel today. Mr. Victor Violante and Mr. Apollinar Tolentino are with us today to share their experiences on how social dialogue can promote decent work in the sector. But we are equally keen to hear from other panelists about the sector's potential to promote decent work, particularly for women and youth. We are also keen to learn about the developments around employment statistics work that is highly important and in which the ILO is very closely engaging and collaborating with FAO. In the past 2 years, the world has faced the unprecedented consequences of the COVID-19 crisis, from which no region, no country, and no sector has been spared. The ILO reported COVID-related working hours losses being 4 times higher than those experienced during the economic crisis of 2009. In this context, the importance of social dialogue has increased even further, as tripartite constituents and sectoral stakeholders around the globe have been effectively working together to find sustainable solutions for improving the sector's performance and conditions of work. There's still a lot of work to be done. Despite its potential to promote economic growth and employment, the forest sector is facing persistent decent work deficits. These deficits include poor and unsafe working conditions, obstacles to the right to freedom and association and collective bargaining, low productivity, low wages, and lack of access to social protection, including, and of course, the high incidence of informality. Forests continue to be dangerous workplaces with multiple occupational safety and health risks to those working in those forests. These are risks related to the use of machines, falling trees, transportation, climatic hazards, noise and vibration, and also exposure to chemical and biological substances. In this regard, the ILO's Code of Practice on Safety and Health in Forestry Work continues to be a relevant and useful tool for use in the sector. International labour standards provide a tried and trusted foundation for policy responses. The ILO actively promotes a human-centered recovery from the COVID-19 crisis that is inclusive, sustainable and resilient. Respect for international labour standards and promoting their ratification, implementation and supervision should be reinforced. Coherent and effective laws, regulations and policies aligned with international labour standards and duly implemented are a precondition for decent work, including in forestry. The world of work is undergoing major changes, and the forest sector is of course also subject to change. Technological innovations, demographic shifts, environmental and climate change, globalization, and persistent inequalities are among issues that have a direct impact on employment and conditions of work, as well as the future of work in the sector. Forestry is a key sector for a just transition to a carbon and resource-efficient economy. The sector has potential to help mitigate the impact of climate change while promoting decent work through more sustainable production practices, reforestation and forest restoration, and circular economy approaches. This requires adequate support for employers and workers in the sector, including in aspects such as creation of an enabling environment for sustainable enterprises, the formulation and implementation of policies to facilitate the transition from the informal to the formal economy, adequate labour protection and quality skills development, training and skills certification opportunities, among others. I wish you all an excellent session on the future of decent and sustainable work in the forestry sector, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much to Arlette van Leur. Yes, so you can clap. From the ILO, and some key words which we will hear more of later: social dialogue, respect for collective bargaining and social protection, and indeed transition. Key words there. Let's move on then now to Ms. Paula Deda, who is Director of Forest, Land and Housing Division at UNEC, to tell us about the role of green jobs in forestry to advancing a circular, everyone talks about circular economy, but circular bio-based economy. So Paula Deda, she's going to be on video also.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, let me start my remarks by honoring all who take care of our forests, biodiversity, and forest landscapes. Let me thank those who invest in sustainable forest management, thus allowing us to benefit from forest ecosystem services and the transition to a circular bio-based economy. Thank you also to my colleagues from FAO and ILO for joining forces to organize this important event and for our decades-long fruitful cooperation on the topic of decent green jobs in the forest sector. My special gratitude goes to all speakers. Your presence underlines the importance of the employment questions on the political agenda of many forest-related organizations and stakeholders. Forests provide countless services beyond the production of wood. They protect and sustain lives by providing clean air and water. They safeguard biodiversity and climate stability, and they provide us with food, energy, health protection, and recreation opportunities. However, until recently, forest jobs were mostly associated with traditional activities related to silviculture, the growing and cultivation of trees, and timber harvesting. Today, the new job opportunities are enhancing all forest ecosystem functions. UNICE and FAO have been working jointly on defining, describing, and promoting green jobs. We have contributed to reinforcing the cooperation between forestry stakeholders to shape the future of employment in this sector. I recommend you consult our recent publications on green jobs in the forest sector workforce in the UNICE region, and the guidelines for the promotion of green jobs in forestry. Today, the workforce in the forest sector faces the same challenges as other traditional economic sectors, in addition to very specific challenges. This will be discussed in detail today. Therefore, the sustainability of forest sector jobs is becoming critical for the future of the sector. Without a workforce employed under decent conditions, the future of forestry is at stake, and with it, all the benefits of forest to the entire society. But there are new horizons that bring new opportunities, particularly the transition towards sustainable development and the circular bio-based economy. This promotes a shift towards bioproducts, which formerly ended up in waste streams and are now value-added products. These new products, once manufactured on a larger scale, and the new technologies used will create jobs for workers from all educational backgrounds. Our discussions today will certainly advance awareness of decent work, green jobs, and sustainability in the forest sector. However, the existing and future policy tools and mechanisms to promote cross-sectoral approaches should also be at the center of the debate. Therefore, I'm glad to see the representatives of governments and international organizations participating here. Let us not forget that globalization, digitalization, and changing society and changing labor markets influence the forest sector as well. The diversification of tasks and new technologies will dominate our future, and we have to start with a reformed forestry education and training to attract the young generation to the sector and make our workforce future-proof. Forest workers, forest managers, and forest owners will need new cross-cutting skills, such as communication, conflict management, and entrepreneurship to face new challenges. They will also have to keep track of environmentally driven changes, new technologies, and business management models. The forest workforce will need to be much more aware of their work's environmental and social impact and sustainable development concepts. Green jobs will emerge in areas like energy production from renewable resources, energy efficiency, waste and water management, air quality improvement, restoring and preserving biodiversity, building and managing green spaces, and infrastructure for ecotourism and other activities. This will enlarge the scope and attractiveness of the forest sector for future-proof, new and greener professions. While there are many new opportunities, job stability, remuneration, working conditions, informal work, outsourcing to contractors, or the possible involvement of migrant work in the sector cannot be overlooked. And gender remains an issue as well. the forest workforce needs to become much more gender balanced and resilient. While a transition to a circular, bio-based economy offers many new prospects and jobs to the forest sector, it also can help retain jobs in many small and medium-sized enterprises. This might have a sponge effect and give jobs to professional groups that have lost their jobs in the transition process. The development of all these new economic activities in the forest, including the recreation of forest ecosystem management, has a triple effect. It retains the existing forest workforce, it revitalizes rural areas, and it creates attractive career paths for vulnerable groups, young people, women of rural populations. Finally, let me reiterate that the future of new green jobs in the forest sector will strongly depend on how we adapt already today existing school curricula, how we address existing skill gaps, and how we adapt the future workforce to their new career paths. Only this will help make the forest sector an innovative sector for qualified workers looking for future-oriented careers in a circular, bio-based economy. Therefore, the continuous dialogue on the future of green jobs in the forest sector and on decent work and sustainability is of critical importance. Foresters and all those who take care of our forests need decent work conditions and sustainable job opportunities. The benefit of forests to the entire society depends on that. Thank you again for your participation today in today's highly relevant and important discussions and your commitment for the future of us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Ms. Paula Deda from UNICE. She's Director of Forest, Lands and Housing Division, left us a number of things that will develop during this session: the circular economy, decent jobs, the growth areas, making the sector more attractive, and of course, gender. She said it needs to be much more gender balanced, and I know we're going to pick up on that a little bit later on this morning. But what of our hosts, the Republic of Korea? My third time here, and I didn't take the taxi into town from Incheon. I took the train, a bad mistake because it took a very long time. However, it gave me the chance to see how much green there was, these huge, thick forests. And I thought, this is Korea. I didn't expect to see all these forests. I thought it's going to be very interesting to find out more. And I'm delighted to say we have the Director General of the Forest Industry Policy Bureau at the KFS, Mr. Yongwan Kim, who will tell us about green jobs in forestry here in the Republic of Korea. Mr. Kim, the floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, participants, and ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome. I am Yongwan Kim, Director General of the Forestry Industry Public Bureau, Policy Bureau of Korea Forest Service. Thank you for attending the World Forest Congress. I'm very pleased to invite to speak at a session that discusses sustainable development method of green jobs. I would like to introduce the Republic of Korea's green job policies. The entire world continues to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as environmental issues due to climate change. This combination increases economic burden of the poverty population more than others. The international society strengthens the role of the forest to achieve carbon neutrality. Furthermore, we are working together toward solving diversity inequality in our society. The Korea Forest Service also aims to create sustainable green jobs in various fields of forest to achieve carbon neutrality and overcome economic inequality deepened by COVID-19. First, expansion policy of wood use take the carbon neutrality and revitalize the sluggish economy by creating green jobs. In order to expand the use of wood, the Korea Forest Service is promoting forest policies such as creating an eco-friendly wood city and a timber industry complex and fostering the forest biomass industry. We are also trying to increase the use of wood product by developing wood products to replace plastic. This expansion of wood use is not only the important policy for climate crisis, but also provide jobs for the vulnerable by revitalizing the timber industry. And the second, we incorporate advanced information and communication technology into forest policy and train IT professionals in the forestry sector to provide high quality jobs. In Korea, we use 25 types of forest GIS maps in forestry policies, such as forest type maps, soil maps, and spatial planning maps, etc. In addition, we provide good jobs by training IT experts as using a high-level forest fire and a landslide prediction system using drones and information technology. Especially, we have the unprivileged economy recover as well as prevent natural disaster by providing forest jobs such as forest fire prevention activities and forest restoration. And third, we provide more people forest welfare, including eco-tourism opportunities, and train forest welfare professionals to create a new job in preparation for the post-COVID era. Increasingly, Koreans are interested in enjoying mountains and healing. Moreover, after COVID-19, the demand has increased further, and providing opportunity to find a job in the forest. For example, Yuasup Cheoman, which is the kind of facility for the children's natural education, is a good example in Korea. It is established with the national approval, and more than 2,000 are registered all over the country. And this institution has a forest guide for little children. They are registered and permitted by Korea Forest Service, and it also becomes an important job in the field of forest welfare. Finally, the Korea Forest Service plays a major role in creating forest jobs in mountainous area by introducing a forest job creation center, a policy organization of forest jobs. And we call it this institution as a power plant for the green jobs. In Korean society, local extinction as decreasing in the population of mountain villages is becoming a social problem. And I think this is due to the loss of jobs in mountainous area. Korea constitutes 63% of mountain in the country. So not only agriculture, but also forests are important means of the employment in mountainous areas. Therefore, creating forest jobs is an important solution to prevent the local extinction. For the Forest Job Creation Center deploys a job coordinator called Guru Manager at the site to provide various support, such as consulting, education, and market development so that residents can start a business. This is also based on our experience regarding we promote the kind of policy to promote the mountainous and village area. But we have also failure experience. So based on that result, so we think this kind of the manager, the group manager, is needed as a leader. And through this, the company will be established in the region, and eventually local forest job will be created and solve the problem of the regional extinction. As such, Korea has the policy to create and train forest jobs in various ways, and a new government, which we will launch next week, has also very interest. Under the new government's plan, the number of forest jobs currently, we expect that expand at currently 360,000 to 500,000. Nonetheless, we implement the strengthened law from January for preventing safety accident at forest business site. Like this, we make effort to improve the safety of the forest workplace, because the forest workplace is very dangerous, so we promote this kind of the policy. I hope this general meeting will be the opportunity to share the ideas and create jobs in the forest, and reserve and solve the social and economic, emotional difficulties after COVID-19 through in-depth discussions. I would like to close my speech with hopes that you enjoyed various attractions of the Korean culture and the Seoul, and bring good memories. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Kim, Director General of the Forest Industry and Policy Bureau at KFS. And it's good to hear what you had to say about the expansion in the use of wood. I like the idea of this eco-friendly wood city. That sounds amazing. I would like to see it. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure our colleagues who are going to speak in a moment will be very keen to hear about the expansion in the number of forest jobs from 360,000 to 500,000. That sounds very encouraging, and you're going to do that in just a short time. So, Mr. Kim, thank you very much. Please stay in your seat. I'm now going to invite our panelists for Block 1, and this is Social Dialogue Toward Decent Work in the Forest Sector. They are Mr. Apolinar Zazuela Tolentino, who's Regional Representative for the region Asia Pacific at BWI, that's the Building and Woodworkers International, and Mr. Victor Violenti, Chief Executive of the Australian Forest Products Association. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. So we're going to talk about a number of things, including social dialogue and sustainable work and safe working conditions, because that's been highlighted by a number of our speakers so far this morning. And let's start off with Apolinar, so Mr. Tolentino. Can you share some experiences, give us some examples of what you've seen in this sector? How can we promote decent work in the sector through social dialogue? Apolinar.
Thank you, Henry. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can. I think we can too. Can we all hear him? Yes. Thumbs up. Thank you.
Well, you have heard from no less than the director-elect how social dialogue works at the global level, where we were part of this direct engagement with the employers' organization, together with the member states of the ILO, when we had the discussion on the promotion of decent work and safety and health in the forestry in May 6 to 9 in Geneva. That document provided, as she outlined, among others, a specific clause on decent work and also on social dialogue. But let me reiterate that the social dialogue actually is anchored on 4 interconnecting pillars. One is, of course, employment creation, social protection, social dialogue, as we are discussing now, and for us, the cornerstone of the decent work is the right to self-organization and collective bargaining. And we have, as you asked Henry, concrete examples. Some of you may have attended yesterday a session sponsored by FSC, the Forest Stewardship Council. BWI is an international member of FSC. They promote certification in the forest plantations and as well as in the chain of custody. For a long time, we have a disagreement, if I can use that word, with the Employers Organization of North America on the language that to be used in the chain of custody. That is something that can be verified when the auditors go to the certified companies, whether they're in compliance with the standard as they have voluntarily subscribed to when they been certified using the FSC standard. And the agreement lasted for, you won't believe it, almost a decade. We had a mediator or facilitator between us and the North American Employers Group, and with the platform provided by FSC by creating two working groups, one after the other. Eventually, last year, we managed to agree on the language on the chain of custody standards that is actually an extraction from the Conventions 87 and 98, the cornerstone of the ILO standards on the right to self-organization and collective bargaining. And you can imagine with more than 50,000 certified companies of FSC under the chain of custody to be required to observe these standards in their operation. That's one example of a global engagement of BWI. In the context of COVID outbreak, for example, our affiliate in New Zealand, the First Union, again, on the very tripartite platform engagement under the Forest Industry Safety Council, they came up with a protocol in order to provide livelihood jobs, continuous jobs to our members and as well as non-members at the height of COVID outbreak. You will remember many of the countries in the world, as we again heard from Director Alet, had not been spared of the outbreak of COVID. And our members, employees, workers need job at the height of outbreak. And this protocol allows them to rearrange their work schedule, to observe certain protocols that will allow them to be employed, some in rotation, and also observing minimum health requirements once you report to work. There are many examples.
Well, you've given us two very good examples so far.
Yeah.
I'm going to pause you there for a moment because I want to bring in Victor Violante. So, Victor, you heard what Apollinaire said there. So, some good dialogue on certification, chain of custody, collective bargaining, self-organization, really, really good. Protocols for common standards for workers who are sometimes very, very vulnerable. So, can you give us examples from your perspective on how social dialogue can promote decent work in this sector?
Thank you, Henry, and I agree with Apollinaire, and I think the Australian experience that I've been involved with also reflects the importance of tripartite social dialogue. And I think one thing that I've seen firsthand is the importance of the state being a willing participant in that and showing leadership. And we're seeing that around the world as a priority as we manage all these challenges that we're hearing about. It's important that the three parties involved in the social dialogue work together on creating a vision that provides certainty and decent working conditions. And just to share some Australian examples of how this has worked well, we've got a federal election, a national election in 2 weeks, and we, the industry representative, has been working very closely, more closely than ever before, with the union that represents most of the forestry and timber workers on a shared national vision of what the industry needs to look like in the next 10, 20 years. And that's around embracing sustainability opportunities, ensuring that we have the skilled workforce that we will need as we pivot towards more advanced manufacturing, bioproducts, bioenergy needs, and ensuring that Australia and our region has the timber resource we need to meet the increasing demand. Another example is the work that is happening in Australia with traditional owners. It's an area where Australia has not done well in the past, but we're seeing renewed focus working with the certification bodies to empower Indigenous owners to create new jobs in timber processing, in forest management. One example, the Wick people in Cape York in far north Queensland, a very remote community with a lot of social challenges, and they're in the process of developing a timber processing precinct on a mining lease, and they'll be restoring the land, but also producing about $30 million US worth of timber a year, and creating 70 jobs, and working with FSC to have forest management certification. So that's one of the many success stories of working with traditional owners, and that's only happened because of that tripartite social dialogue. In this case, it's largely being led by the elders of the traditional people, and that's something that is certainly applicable around the world, where traditional owners really need to be empowered and supported to do more with the resource that they manage.
Now, I'm just wondering, actually, Victor, is that the kind of thing that we could define as a, how can we call it, a just transition, a decent transition? Because we heard earlier from the ILO about the need for transformative change in the world of work, but to make sure that this is green and it is just. Let's think about the ILO centenary declaration. It talks about this, and it wants the transition to be just, to ensure a future of forest work that takes into account both environmental and decent work objectives. Now, I like the example you gave us, the Wick people, I think you said, in the far north, and they've got this lease from mined lands, or land that's been despoiled, and they're going to bring it back to life. This is very good. But what about some more opportunities, and indeed challenges, because there will be challenges? Can you give us some of those?
Yeah, look, well, in Australia, we have 132 million hectares of natural forest. We're the sixth most forested country in the world. So there's enormous potential to do a lot more with traditional owners. The challenges are that natural forestry in Australia faces enormous pressure from environmental groups who want to see an end to natural forests, even if it's being done by traditional owners. So that's largely due to misinformation around the sustainability of the industry and the benefits of managing the forests well for timber production that can also manage the conservation, biodiversity, and climate change mitigation needs. So there is an opportunity around better valuing the ecosystem services that well-managed timber production forests provide, and in the longer term, creating markets that will pay a premium for that.
That's quite alarming, isn't it? Because on the one hand, here we are talking about a just and green transition, well-managed forestry, but on the other hand, we have environmental groups who think this is a zero-sum game, and who think actually you're destroying nature, you're destroying the flora and fauna, you're destroying the forests. Apolinar, are you finding the same challenges in this transition, or is it different as far as you're concerned?
Well, more or less the same, but before I go into that pointed question, let me just go back with the concept that social dialogue is a means, it's a platform, and for us, the agenda to make use of this mechanism is to have an organized unions in the company, in the forest areas. And it's not a magic wand. We have to do our work to make use of these tools to organize. We have many experiences that although there are commitments and a tripartite setup at the national level, on the enterprise, but if it is not complied with in the ground, then it doesn't make sense at all. That brings us to a concern on the basic tenets of social dialogue. There must be a legitimacy of representation. And it comes to our attention, for example, that in this global World Forestry Congress, the government of Myanmar was invited to our shack because it's not a legitimate government to represent in any international event like this, particularly under the auspices of the UN. They are not accepted in the ILO. They were not accepted also in the WHO, so we have to be very cautious about engaging legitimate partners in our engagement.
So, Apollinaire, your point is taken and it's well made. So what about the opportunities and challenges briefly, please?
Well, there are many opportunities. On the high end, for example, it was reported in Switzerland they will have the tallest wood building in the next coming years. They will say it will surpass the record of the Norwegians called the Wood Hotel, more than 100 feet high, all wood. And you can imagine the supply chain that will generate from this project, a good model for all of us. On the other side, for example, our affiliates in India, they are working with the tribal communities, particularly women, tribal women on the non-timber forest products to gain them employment, and working in what we call the trust fund of Odisha and Maharashtra government as a few examples, Henry.
Excellent. Apollinaire and Victor, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Please keep your seats. We may come back to you on some of those points, or indeed fresh points a little bit later on. The study I mentioned earlier by FAO, the ILO, and the Tunin Institute reveals that an estimated 20% of employees, you two will be interested in this, in the forest sector are women, and that more of the women are engaged in the informal forest sector. Another important aspect of our discussion today is the challenge of the integration of women and youth in the forest sector workforce. And I'm now going to invite the speakers of the second block. It's called Forest Sector as an Engine for Promoting Decent Work for Women and Youth. So let me welcome Ms. Catherine Fernholz from the Steering Committee of the Women's Forest Congress. She's going to be joining us virtually. And here live in the room, and they're going to come up shortly, are Ms. Chu Jung-myung, Director of Department and Multilateral Cooperation and Humanitarian Assistance. That's on the Korean International Cooperation Agency, and Ms. Rebecca Sanyu from the Development Research and Training at Uganda. Please to come up and take your seats. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to start off with Ms. Fernholz, Katie Fernholz, who's there you are, nodding in agreement. Thank you very much indeed. And I love your backdrop as well, Minneapolis, St. Paul's. Is that right? Yes, indeed. Oh, and you're advertising something, Women's Forest Congress. Quite right too, quite right too. Okay, so you've monitored the discussion from where you are. Decent work, of course, is fundamental to ensuring sustainable forestry operation and safe working environment for those who take care of our forests. So here's a question for you. Why do you think we need to consider women distinctly in this context? We do for other sectors, but why in this one in particular, the forests? And how do women make a difference in the forest sector? And just tell us, what are the specific needs of women as regards work decency? Over to you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Henry. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm honored to be a part of this discussion and grateful for the speakers in this session, the expertise and experience that's being shared. I also appreciate this question. As a member of the Steering Committee of the Women's Forest Congress, we have been asking ourselves this question too. Why must women be considered distinctly when we talk about forests and the forest sector? The answer begins with the importance of women and the needs that women have. The roles of women and our needs must be considered specifically and distinctly to ensure good outcomes. Leaders in the forest sector must be able to consider workers' unique needs and opportunities, as well as more general features to ensure individual and organizational success and equity. Women are primary caregivers within many communities and families, and many times we are primary caregivers of the land and deeply connected to forests and forest products. For women to succeed in the forest sector, organizations and employers must listen to women and support women's roles and needs, including parental leave support for motherhood, leadership development, decent work, and safety in the workplace.
Thank you very much. I've got a follow-up question, Catherine. I mean, how do we make the forest sector a true engine for promoting decent work and forest careers for women? And how can we give women a more prominent place in the sector? We heard earlier that women are horribly underrepresented in the formal part of this industry.
Thank you. The Women's Forest Congress has identified 5 themes that we will be addressing at our Congress in October later this year. We will gather our diverse perspectives and collective expertise to develop strategies and solutions that address the most pressing current and forthcoming challenges for forests and women. We will advocate for the most compelling opportunities for women in the forest community. The 5 areas, 5 critical topics that we are addressing are leadership for equity and inclusion, workforce opportunities for increasing retention, recruitment, and leadership, women as catalysts for change, addressing today's greatest forest challenges, and supporting each other. More information is, of course, available at the Women's Forest Congress, and that information addresses these themes, why they are important, and how we are working on them. Of particular importance is addressing all parts of the career and work journey and experience in the forest sector. This includes recruitment to forestry schools or a first forest sector job, retention through multiple life changes that workers experience, and opportunities for leadership and the highest levels of advancement. There are unique barriers and possibilities along this journey that all must be addressed to enable a more balanced gender representation in the forest sector. We must see the challenges, take action to overcome them, and set goals to measure our progress. Many efforts are already underway in many countries around the world, including the work of the Women's Forest Congress that is centered within the United States. And as we've already heard today, it starts with dialogue, it starts with listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. We will listen to you intently. And thank you. And do stand by, because we may come back to you a little bit later on when we open up the session. Let's now move to Ms. Young Myung Chu, the Director of Department of Multilateral Cooperation and Humanitarian Assistance at COICA. Thank you for being here. Can you explain why green jobs in forestry are particularly important for women, youth, and just talk a bit more about the sustainable natural resource management. Why are green jobs important for women and youth in this area?
Thank you, Henry. It's my great pleasure to be here today. Just to answer your question, we already know that youth makes up more than 60% of the population in developing countries, and 70% of this youth population currently resides in rural area, half of whom or more are girls and women. 2 years into COVID-19 crisis, many global full-time jobs were lost, and young workers and women have been particularly affected by the crisis. Recently, ILO has reported that global unemployment is expected to remain above pre-COVID-19 levels until at least 2023. Even before the crisis, a large percentage of people living in forest and savanna areas had incomes of less than $1.25 per day. Moreover, many of our world's forests are at risk. Between 2015 and 2020 alone, forest loss was experienced at 10 million hectares per year. This has inevitably affected carbon stock and efforts to mitigate climate change. Therefore, in a word, youth and women are important to ensure inclusiveness and sustainability of natural resource management. The disproportionate impact of the crisis on youth and women's employment, along with the degradation of forestry, could only deepen the inequalities, weakening the economic and social fabric of almost every nation. In this context, the creation of decent green jobs is increasingly being seen as a potential solution. Given the global phenomenon of aging farmers and forest dwellers, I believe that youth and women can and should be placed at the center of solution through the promotion of green jobs in forest sector. supporting green jobs in forest sector can support natural resource management while providing meaningful livelihood for women and youth. And their participation in the forest sector could really play a critical role in building pathways for sustainable forest landscape. In previous speech, Mr. Kim has given a few good examples of Korean case of green jobs in here. South Korea's nationwide forestation plan as a part of rural poverty reduction mechanism in post-conflict period provided important platform for sustainable development and support to forest nurseries provided ample employment opportunities. Moreover, supporting the development of non-wood forest products, value chains such as honey, resin, insects, and etc. has also been important sources of diversified incomes for marginalized groups that do not conventionally have access to agricultural land. Yes.
Tremendous. Thank you very much indeed for that, Ms. Chu. And we heard earlier, I think it was Victor was talking about the importance of the state when it came to the tripart social dialogue, and you're with a state agency, KOICA. But what about local actors? What are some of the specific things or measures that local actors can do to support youth inclusion in the forestry section?
From policy support to skill provision to community-level employment initiatives, there is a lot that can be done, from NGOs to local governments to formal and informal local organizations such as cooperative and cultural groups. There are many stakeholders who can be involved to support youth with meaningful and decent green jobs in the forest sectors. Some of the local governments have captured green jobs opportunities by introducing programs coupled with training schemes targeted specifically for youth. Such initiatives could also serve to address the high unemployment disparities that exist within their localities in rural areas. Today, I'd like to take this opportunity to briefly share some examples of KOICA-funded FAO Green Jobs Rural Youth Employment Project. FAO is currently working in 3 countries, namely Sierra Leone, Zimbabwe, and East Timor-Leste, over a 4.5-year period with total budget of $6 million. This project aims to, firstly, providing green jobs for youth, secondly, supporting selected countries with their transitions to green economy by utilizing the rural economy and the agriculture and forestry sectors. Through this project in Sierra Leone, youth beneficiaries will be working with the Ministry of Agriculture to support extension services for an agroforestry project. Youth will undergo a 3-week sector-specific training on agroforestry to support farmers at community level to better incorporate agroforestry techniques within their ongoing agriculture projects. In Zimbabwe, youth beneficiaries are being trained to support 3 nurseries, apiculture and sustainable timber production in one of the project districts. Youth are being trained on 3 nurseries and apiculture production, as well as how to properly monitor sustainable timber harvesting. In Timor-Leste, the soft and business green skills training have been done, and a youth interest survey has been conducted to grasp youth interest in green public employment program, which will be established in collaboration with local authorities. Also, youth-led green businesses will be set up and with support of private sector in following years. I think this can be a good example of how local actors can play a role in supporting youth inclusion in forestry sector.
Tremendous. Thank you very much, Ms. Chu. So Sierra Leone, Zimbabwe, and Timor-Leste, East Timor. Well, let's go then to Uganda. Rebecca, you're here representing what's going on there. Can you talk to us about youth participation in the forest value chain in Uganda? What are the challenges for youth participation? Because some youth will say, oh, I'm not interested in forests. I want to go to Kampala. I will find my fortune there. I'm not interested in this traditional stuff, forest, trees. But you are looking to persuade them otherwise. So talk to us about the challenges for youth participation and the key opportunities for including youth in forest value chains.
Yes, Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In Uganda, youth are mostly employed in the low-skill sectors, low-skill stages of the value chain. And this is because they're just starting out and mostly they haven't been to school to specifically train in forest management. They find jobs in the sector as a form of employment. But you also have another set of youth who have been through school and universities, and these are also employed, but they find themselves still in the low skill stages because the training that they receive is insufficient or inadequate to deal with high-level equipment, for example. So part of the challenge that the employers find is that they have to retrain, and they don't have to undergo the cost of retraining. So they put these, what you would think were highly skilled youth, still in the low, the low skill sectors, the low skill levels. And then we have instances where young people cannot be employed by the entire sector because the formal segment of this sector is very small. For example, out of the
Sorry, Rebecca, if I can pause you, would you mind taking off the mask because people cannot hearing you very clearly?
All right. Would that be better?
That's a big difference, yes, already.
Okay, so I was saying that the sector employs around about 1 million young people, and only 1/10 of these are in the formal sector. So you would find that the sector is highly informal, and this means that young people mostly have to create their own jobs in the forestry sector, and therefore they have to work in groups because they are unable to work by themselves as individuals. And part of this is because I've already talked about the lack of training and skills, but they also have limited resources for investment. They have a very low financial base, and lending institutions consider forestry as a high risk because it takes so long to have the returns. And then in terms of land ownership, they have very small plots, and because of that, there is land use competition, the competition of food versus trees. And then others don't have land at all. And so they would need to hire or lease the land. And then the owners of the land that they lease do not want perennial crops on their land. They want short-term crops. And so you find that young people are constrained. So they would have to come together to find means of investing in forestry.
A lot of challenges there, Rebecca, but I would like to hear briefly about key opportunities, including
yes.
Youth in value chains, and also a little bit about the work you did with FAO in the sawn wood value chain in Uganda. The decent work deficits you'd identified. You've talked about some of those already, but also the recommendations you drew out of this work for policymakers. I know I'm pushing you, but to be brief, because we're time is
Yes, the opportunities mostly lie in the agroforestry, because within this, you have non-state actors especially providing training and supporting young people to have multi-purpose trees that grow fast, and also to be able to use the land both for food crops and also commercial trees. And so they get the multiple benefits. Also, there are opportunities for creating satellites for nurseries and trading in seedlings for income generation. But also, there is a little bit of opportunity to be employed in the commercial forestry as transporters, as money lenders, areas that are not specifically pertaining to the growing of trees, but supporting the value chain in other terms. Now, in terms of decent work deficits, this is very much consistent with what we had from the opening comments from ILO. There is very little knowledge of the legal and policy frameworks that govern decent work and employment. But also, for the employers, there is the cost implication of providing decent work, providing social protection, binding contracts, medical cover, all those things. The employers don't want to go into that. And also because it's a highly informal sector where also young people want to keep jobs, they would rather not go into negotiating for decent work. They would rather, work for a given period of time, get used to the job, consolidate their position before they begin talking about decent work. And that's very, very important because of the very high unemployment.
Yes, yes.
Now, in terms of policy, we are asking government to, promote cooperatives because there are no unions for the forestry sector. But can they promote cooperatives? Can they incentivize agroforestry? And then we have in our law the tree fund, which has not been implemented for some time. And so we are asking government to reinstate the tree fund so that people can have access to this fund and be able to invest in forestry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting. I mean, I think you might have to send Apolinar and Victor over there to support you in Kampala when you're dealing with Mr. Museveni, or indeed some of the groups, some of the employers' groups there. But it's tremendous to hear the work that you're doing, Rebecca, in Uganda. Let's talk about data. I mean, we've had some stats already, but let's go a bit deeper into data on employment in the forest sector. Because there's so much informality around, how do you know what is really happening on the ground? I'm very pleased to say that we've got with us on this panel 2 experts who can bring more light on the role and methods of collecting and analysing forest-related statistics. We have in the room live right there, Mr. Jörg Schweinler, who's a researcher from the Thunen Institute. He's author and co-author of accepted voluntary paper on global trends in forest sector contribution to job creation and income. And on the line, hopefully on the video, yeah, I can see her there, Ms. Marta Gałowska, who's the head of Department of International Cooperation at Polish State Forests. So welcome to both of you. Marta, can you nod if you can hear me? Yes, and a wonderful smile. Thank you. Okay, Jörg, I'm going to come to you first of all. Now, you contributed to the study I mentioned earlier today, and you're carrying out an interesting project, the Wood for Work project. So numbers for employment in the forest sector are quite different depending on the sources used. You've got the Work for Wood project, analyse available data and joint forces with FAO and ILO to propose some new numbers. So please tell us about the numbers being circulated and what you think the correct one is. Can you get closer to your mic?
A scientist a question like this, you will get the answer, it depends.
We don't want depends, we want something, clear.
Now let me explain a bit in more detail what I'm talking about when it comes to it depends. So we have to be aware that any number that is around is an approximation of reality. So we are not able at this stage, based on the information that is available, to come up with a number with a high accuracy. What we can do our best to come close. And why is that so? So looking at the different data sources we have, the different data providers, we have to acknowledge that there's only a limited number of countries is reporting information on employment in the forest sector. That's first. And then second, if you look at the different numbers, I'm afraid you have to look in the small prints, and that's the reporting units. And sometimes it's person talk about jobs, green jobs, person's full-time equivalent, which is different units talking about almost the same, but having those different units will result in different numbers. They are not right, they are not wrong, they are just approximations of reality. And then another factor is how you define the forest sector. Which economic activities do you consider be part of the economic sector, of the forest sector, and which are out? So, for example, the number that has been mentioned quite often right now, the 33 million. So we think, we thought that forestry and logging, that wood manufacturing and pulp and paper industries belong to the forest sector. But you could also add furniture, for example, furniture manufacturing. And you would add that economic activities, of course, the number would significantly expand.
I mean, what if I was a guy in the Dambisa forest of northeast Nigeria and I'm going to get bushmeat for my family?
Yeah.
We will eat some, we will sell some at the market. Are you counting me? Is the government of Muhammadu Buhari, do they know I exist?
Statistically, they might not know that you are existing.
So I'm invisible.
Yeah, to the statistics, you might be invisible. Yes, of course, as a human being, you're not. And the point is here that informality, of course, in official statistics, you won't find, or you hardly find numbers on informal employment. There is great effort made specifically by ILO to also provide information on informal employment. But in the forest sector, in many parts of the forest sector, 80% of the persons working there are informal employed. And that's a huge number.
Yeah. But how can we improve data reliability, briefly if you will, and quality? Because we need to have a really good idea of the figures so that we can make informed decisions, just like we do in every other industry.
Yeah. So first of all, it's of course strengthening the countries that are at that moment not providing information in doing so. So having microdata is key. Then, of course, harmonization among the different data providers. Consistent use of definitions that are existing and the measurement units is a second point. And of course, for further analysis, we need time series that are not scattered. So having some information for 1 year and then 2 years nothing, and then again, that's of course also not very helpful in doing analysis. And of course, and another one point is if you would like to use employment statistics also to combine them with production statistics in order to come up with numbers on productivity, for example, you have to make sure that labor statistics and production statistics are fit.
Yeah.
And that's also, at that point, not always the case.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jörg. Let's go to Marta Gaworska, who is joining us from Poland. There she is again. So Marta, can you tell us what role employment statistics, hopefully accurate ones, what role do they play in the decision-making in state forests in Poland?
Good morning to everyone, and thank you for having me in this very interesting discussions. Data collection on employment and the conditions of work is an important foundation for decision making in such organization like the State Forest in Poland. We manage approximately 18% of forests in Poland and employ almost 26,000 of workers. So we are a very significant player on the labor market, not only in the forest sector. Our activities provide livelihoods on rural populations and have tangible impact on the development of rural areas through the entire country, as we also create the private markets for forest services. Every year, the state forests commission the necessary work in the forest to more than 4,000 contractors, which create the employing markets for almost 50,000 of people. So you can see there's a lot at stake, both nationally but also locally. And therefore, there is a great understanding among the management of the organization as ours that our success depends on the effective, well-functioning workforce. For the statistic, besides general information on employment, we collect specific data on the conditions of work, such as work time and exposure to risk factors. We distinguish those for a number of environmental related ones, but also those relating to the modernization of work and mechanical factors. We also monitor constantly the progress and elimination of those factors. In addition, very important to this work, we monitor information on participation in trade unions and forest association among our employees. And practically, always disaggregate data by gender to draw conclusions on how women experiences diverse work conditions and limitations. So all in all, this allows us to have a very good idea on the situation in the organization and anticipate changes needed for its successful continuation. And let me just say you that next year, the organization will celebrate 100 years of anniversary of existence.
So happy birthday in advance on your centenary. Just very, very quickly, it sounds like a really extensive statistical information. You know, data collection, very, very important. Can you tell us how it informs policy? You know, it's one thing to collect such extensive statistical information, that's great, but you're doing it for a purpose. How does it inform policy?
It is a regular obligation to our organization to provide the annual reports both to the parliamentarian and the government, but also to publish it and have it accessible to all citizens in a kind of the statistical yearbook for forestry, which is published by the Statistic Poland main office. And there was a mentioning about the reliability of the data. So let me share some experience about the collection of data at the almost grant level, because these regular annual reports contain a comprehensive set of information, as I mentioned, including data on the conditions of forest resources and forest management and their economic use, but also employment, wages, and salaries in forestry and wood sectors. And aiming at a full-scale compilation and presentation of forestry-related data, this collection involves all available information from administrative resources, such as the state forests, but also registers kept by the ministry, supported by the research communities and studies from the Forest Research Institute and Bureau for Forest Management and Geodesy. And in case of our contribution, we take every care to deliver the data, which is reported 3 times a year on the various issues. And of course, the updates are generated by the internal information system of the state forests at the level of headquarters. But what is important, it embraces the entire organization, which means 429 forest district units, 17 regional directorate office, and other supervising offices. So this is also important for the policy making to have such a broad spectrum of the information going down to the bottom of every region, every local.
Well, it sounds very granular and very detailed and with purpose. So thank you very much, Marta. We haven't got much time left, and I'm going to shortly invite the Senior Forestry Officer from FAO to give us some closing remarks and takeaway messages. But before that, if you've been listening carefully, and I'm sure you have, I'm looking at your faces, and I can see you nodding, some of you behind your masks, or responding in a nice animated way, which is good. Does anybody have a question that they feel desperate to ask, and they think, I'm really interested in what's been said, but I have this question? Then you can raise your hand, and I will ask you to go to a microphone and then ask your question. If not, don't worry, there's no problem. I will ask one myself and ask our colleagues to respond very, very briefly. Because, I mean, by way of summary, before I invite Sven Walter to come up, I mean, let's think about what we've heard. You know, the forest sector is providing plenty of renewable products. It's great, but it's getting challenged at the same time. We want a just transition. Trade of these products is expected to increase in the future. We've got increasing demand. The number of people being employed is growing all the time. But I want to know, briefly from our colleagues, what is needed to ensure that the forest sector also provides decent employment opportunities. Let me ask Mr. Kim, first of all, briefly, as your representative of the government here, as is Ms. Chu. But what do you think? What is needed, briefly, to make sure that the forest sector provides decent employment opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult question. That as a government employee, I think the government budget is also very important to promote the, in forestry sector, because we need to promote the forestry industry because they hire lots of the workers. So I think the budget and reservation kind of policies like this, I think. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Rebecca, what do you think? What is needed?
I would think that it's very important to ensure enforcement of standards, because the standards are known, they exist, and we even have them, but the enforcement is very weak. So supporting the systems, the departments that are supposed to ensure standards is important, but also for the enforcers to go down to the informal sector, because right now the standards seem to stop at the formal level.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. So enforcement, that's what Rebecca says. Catherine, what do you say?
I think we need public and private partnership. There's a role of government and there's a role of the private sector. And also some of the challenges that are faced in the forest sector are faced in other sectors. So cross-sector collaboration as well across other industries that are related to natural resources.
So cross-sector collaboration, very good. Jörg, what do you think? And don't say it depends.
Of course it depends. No, I think more from a Central European perspective, we are facing the problem that young people are no longer interested in the sector at all. So to make them interested in the sector and to work for the forestry, in the forests, is a huge challenge. Because I think, at least for Central Europe, decent work is not, compared to other parts of the world, a huge problem.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. Marta, what needs to happen, what is needed to ensure that the forest sector also provides decent employment opportunities?
Not much to add for the previous speakers. One thing which comes to my mind is also the changes in the forest education and availability of good trainings for forest workers, because I think this is something we constantly need to be open for and constantly try to improve in this area.
Thank you. So the training. Apollina.
With all the tools available for trade unions, the international standards of the ILO, certification scheme, procurement guidelines of the government, we have to be in the negotiation table as a trade union, as a social partner. Yeah. Otherwise, we'll be in the menu and we'll be eaten, other than choosing the menu.
Well, we don't want anybody, not least not you, to be eaten. Ms. Chu, what do you think?
Yes, just to echo what Kathleen said, I think the job security is an important part of decent employment, and good income is also a part. So as Mr. Kim said, government should have the budget, but they cannot have, large enough budgets to provide. So I think the partnership between government and the private sector to provide the good jobs and also to provide good skilled human resources would be an important part, I think.
Very good, thank you for that. And finally, Victor from Australia, would you echo that or would you say something different?
Something different. The State of the World Forest Report yesterday had an alarming stat that global consumption of natural resources will double by 2060. the ILO has said that we will need 300 million hectares of additional production forests by 2050. And as a world, we need to have a clear plan on where that resource is going to come from. And OECD countries like Australia that are driving this consumption, and some of it is for good reasons, the push towards more sustainable packaging products and products that will replace plastics, that's great. The push towards timber construction, cross-laminated timber, they're all driving that need for more wood fibre. But the countries that are driving this need to be good global citizens and have a clear strategy of where that resource is coming from, because at the moment it's driving the demand from developing countries who are all trying to do forestry better and more sustainably and supporting decent jobs. But if the demand on their resource is going to increase, then it's going to push in the other direction. So we need to all work together on ensuring that the world is going to have the sustainably sourced wood fibre to meet that demand.
Tremendous. Thank you very much for that, Victor. Excellent. That's been an interesting debate. Before I close the session, I would like to welcome to the floor the representative of the FAO, who will share with us some closing remarks and takeaway messages. So please welcome Mr. Sven Walter, FAO Senior Forestry Officer. Let's give him a round of applause, because he's helped to put this together. Sven, over to you.
Thank you very much, Henry, and thanks a lot for all the participants. Actually, the last round was already the take-home messages, so I think that was really a very interesting debate. And when I also noted some key notes, from the very rich discussion, I noted that we need the transformational change of the jobs to have green and just jobs. We heard about the opportunities which exist in the forestry sector to create new and more jobs. And we got a lot of very interesting information of the Korean policies actually on quality jobs. And for example, creating job centers for mountainous areas to really also in the rural areas to support the economic development. The social dialogue, I think we heard a lot of very interesting arguments, a lot of concrete examples. We were also reminded that social dialogue is a means in order to achieve a just workforce, and that it is important to develop a shared vision of all stakeholders. The examples were very interesting. Catherine, you highlighted the importance of women and how they can support also future and current leadership and support emerging opportunities of the sector. Rebecca reminded us for Uganda that we need to continue to improve the skills of the stakeholders, also in these emerging opportunities, having also new products coming on the markets. And we heard from Ms. Chu concrete examples, for example, the collaboration of Korea with FAO to support countries in their efforts to develop decent jobs. Statistics, well, as my German fellow said, it depends. We are working on this to improve data availability, and the 33 million is a very important number to continue working on this. We also know that there are billions of people who depend on forest and forest products. So we are in between millions and billions, and that's something we need to further work on. And I think, Marta, you showed us from Poland how important it is to have good data for policy making and, for example, to have a statistical yearbook, which is vital in order to have clear guidance for the future. So what does it mean for us? My take-home message is working together with TÜNEN, working together with ILO and with UNECE. We need to collect more accurate data, and we need to improve our methodologies. We heard about harmonization, country support, capacity building, better data series. We will continue to work on this. We need to support the private sector to promote and establish decent work. That is something where I think also we are very well aligned, and with colleagues from the private sector, we will continue working on this. Capacity building remains a key at all levels to have top qualities in the sector. It is a challenge. And last but not least, to have a conducive, enabling environment. So Let's continue to work on this to ensure that forests and forestry can contribute to sustainable economic growth, to a productive employment, and to decent work of all. So that was an important milestone. Thanks to all the colleagues who were here. And Henry, we will continue working on this and hope in 6 years at the next World Forestry Congress, we will report back on progress made. So back to you to close. And thanks to all the colleagues of the panel.
Very much indeed for coming here. Thank you to our colleagues. Wonderful presentations. Obviously, we were short of time, but we've given you a taste of what it's going to take to really achieve a just transformation in this sector, both in Korea and all the partner countries around the world. So thank you very much. I think it must be nearly lunchtime now, so if you want some good, sustainable, maybe kimchi, bimbap or something like that, then go and eat that. If not, we will see you again in a later session. Thank you very much to the panel, and thank you very much for coming. Thank you.